The fork was still in my hand when I saw her laughing with him. Not a polite laugh, not the haha you give to someone's bad joke. This was the kind where her whole body tilted forward, like he'd just told her something worth keeping in a jewelry box. I'd been standing at the dessert table, cutting her a slice of the ridiculous 4-tier cake I'd paid for, when I realized she hadn't touched a single thing I'd served her all night. She was too busy letting him refill her glass. A part of me wanted to throw the fork right into the perfectly lit flower centerpiece, just for the satisfaction of ruining something. Instead, I kept cutting the cake like I was a guest at my own wife's party, because that's what it felt like. I'd paid for everything. The rooftop, the chef, the lanterns, even the stupid imported lilies. But I was just background decoration now. Every time I caught sight of her, she was in motion, leaning closer to him, brushing her hair behind her ear, holding his gaze like the rest of the world had gone quiet. I tried to convince myself she was just being friendly, but the pit in my stomach kept saying otherwise. Then the music shifted, slow, soft, romantic, and people started drifting toward the open space in the middle of the rooftop. I was still holding the plate with her untouched cake when I saw them step onto the floor together. Her silver dress caught the light, his hand settled naturally at her waist, and I realized I hadn't danced with my own wife in months. The worst part? She looked happier in that moment than she had all year. And I was still standing there, holding the fork. I told myself I'd stop staring, that I'd turn my back, mingle with the guests, maybe even pretend I was enjoying myself. But the problem with lies is they don't work when you're the one telling them. My eyes kept tracking them across the rooftop like some pathetic human surveillance camera. They weren't just dancing anymore. They were talking in a way that made the rest of the party fade out. I could see her lips moving slowly, like she was sharing something private, and his head would tilt in just the right way, like he was catching every word and storing it away. The cake plate in my hand was starting to feel absurd. Here I was, the man who'd paid for the whole evening, reduced to holding a melting wedge of dessert while my wife gave another man her undivided attention. I finally set it down on the nearest table, next to a half-empty champagne flute that wasn't mine, and tried to force myself into conversation with a couple of guests. They were talking about how romantic the view was tonight, which felt like a direct punch to the ribs, so I excused myself and slipped away toward the edge of the rooftop. From there, I could see them more clearly, and I could hear just enough to make my stomach knot. She was telling him about our last trip to Italy. Our trip, but she made it sound like it was hers alone. She described the markets, the sunsets, the little cafe where we'd stayed too long drinking cheap wine. Not once did she say we. It was all I. She'd erased me from my own memories. I didn't even notice the waitress until she was standing beside me, asking if I needed another drink. I nodded, because apparently that's what I do. I nod, I smile, I pay for everything, and I watch my wife act like I'm a stranger. When I looked back toward the dance floor, they were gone. Just gone. The space where they'd been was empty, like they'd slipped out of the scene entirely. And that's when I saw the side door to the stairwell slowly swinging shut. My pulse kicked up. It could have been innocent. They could have gone to make a phone call, or get fresh air, or talk about something I wasn't supposed to hear. But the truth sat heavy in my chest. I didn't want to follow them because I was afraid of what I'd find. And yet, my feet were already moving toward the door. The air in the stairwell was warmer than on the rooftop, heavy with that faint scent of industrial dust and something sweet. Maybe her perfume, or maybe I just wanted to believe it was. The echo of my own footsteps made me feel exposed, like I was announcing myself to whatever waited below. Halfway down, I paused, straining to hear. There were voices. Hers, low and breathy, like she was trying not to be overheard, and his, deeper, almost amused. I couldn't catch every word, just fragments, but the tone was enough. She was telling him something about finally feeling alive again, and laughing in that quick, unguarded way she never laughed with me anymore. The stairwell wasn't brightly lit, just those dim overhead bulbs buzzing every few seconds, and the shadows played tricks on my eyes. I kept picturing them close together in some corner, not even noticing the world outside. My chest was tight, but my hands felt oddly calm, like they knew what they wanted to do even if my head didn't. I stopped one step before the landing and listened harder. They were closer now, maybe right around the turn of the stairwell, and I caught his voice clearly. You deserve more than you're getting. It landed in me like a punch. He didn't have to say my name for me to know who he meant. Leora's reply was softer, almost a whisper, but I heard her say, "Maybe I do." I stood there, frozen, my brain running through every possible way I could burst in, demand an explanation, tell him to back off, ask her point-blank what she thought she was doing. But another part of me wanted to stay in the shadows, because if I stepped out now, the truth would be undeniable. And maybe I wasn't ready for undeniable. A sudden sound broke my hesitation. The metallic click of the stairwell door opening 2 flights below, followed by a rush of cooler air. Their voices faded as they moved through it. I rushed to the railing, just in time to see the back of her silver dress disappearing into the dim hallway beyond. He was right beside her, his hand brushing the small of her back like it belonged there. I gripped the railing so hard my knuckles ached. My mind was a war zone. Half of me screaming to follow, half of me telling me to turn around and pretend I never saw. But the thing about moments like that is, they don't just vanish. They stick. They change you. And as I finally forced myself down the steps, I realized the night wasn't even close to finished breaking me. The hallway was narrow, lined with storage doors and the hum of hidden machinery behind the walls. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and something metallic, the kind of place guests weren't supposed to wander into during a rooftop event. I stepped inside just as the stairwell door clicked shut behind me, sealing out the muffled music and laughter from above. Down here, the silence felt heavier, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I could hear them again, faint but distinct, her voice carrying a sharpness now, not quite angry, more like nervous excitement. His was smoother, almost coaxing, like he was pulling her toward a decision. I moved slowly, my shoes silent against the scuffed concrete floor, stopping just before the first corner. My mind was screaming at me to turn back, to avoid seeing something I couldn't unsee, but my body ignored it. I edged closer until their words became clearer. He was saying something about how tonight changes everything, and she laughed, not the carefree kind I'd heard earlier, but something breathless, like she was aware of the line she was standing on. She told him she couldn't be gone too long before people noticed, but she didn't sound like she meant it. I risked leaning around the corner, just enough to see them. They were standing close, too close, their faces barely a hand's width apart. She wasn't pulling away. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I wasn't sure if it was rage or heartbreak making me shake. Every instinct in me wanted to storm in, but I hesitated, because some small, pathetic part of me hoped she'd come to her senses before I had to confront her. Then she glanced over her shoulder, not at me, but toward the end of the hallway, and that's when I realized there was no exit, just a locked maintenance door, which meant they hadn't come down here for privacy on their way somewhere else. They had come here for the privacy itself. She said something I couldn't fully catch, and he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face in a way that made my stomach twist. I felt like I was outside my own body, watching a version of my life I didn't recognize. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, but still I didn't move. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was shock. Or maybe it was because the man I used to be, the one who believed in her, was still hoping there was an explanation that wouldn't destroy me. But deep down, I already knew. And whatever shred of hope I had left was about to be crushed in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was pressed against the wall, watching them like I was trapped behind glass, and the next I was walking forward, my footsteps echoing far louder than they should have in that cramped hallway. They both turned at the same time, the look on her face almost comical in its sudden transformation from surprise to something guarded. His expression didn't change much at all, just a slight lift of the eyebrows, like he'd been expecting me. That look alone made my blood run hotter. "Carlton," she said quickly, like she'd been caught doing something she needed to explain away. But she didn't finish. She didn't have a reason ready. Her voice trailed off, and her eyes flicked between me and him like she was trying to gauge which one of us would speak first. I took a few more steps until I was close enough to see the faint smudge of lipstick on the lapel of his blazer. It might have been nothing, but in that moment, it was everything. I asked her, very quietly, why she was here instead of upstairs with our guests. She opened her mouth, but he cut in, his tone irritatingly calm, telling me she just needed a break, and that I shouldn't take it the wrong way. I think that was the first time in my life I'd wanted to hit someone, really hit them, but all I could manage was a laugh that sounded far more bitter than I intended. She reached for my arm like she wanted to lead me away, but I stepped back. I told her the party was for her, that I'd spent weeks making sure everything was perfect because I thought it would make her happy. And then I asked the question I didn't want the answer to. Was it not enough? She hesitated for a moment, then looked at the floor. That silence said more than anything she could have admitted out loud. I didn't wait for an explanation. I turned and started walking back toward the stairwell, every step feeling heavier than the last. I heard her call my name once, maybe twice, but I didn't stop. I didn't trust myself to hear whatever excuse she was about to give, because I knew it would be the kind that tried to make me feel like I was overreacting. When I pushed the stairwell door open, the sound of music and laughter rushed over me again, almost jarring after the suffocating quiet of that hallway. It was strange. Moments earlier, I'd wanted to disappear into the noise, but now, the thought of going back into that party felt impossible. My place in it was gone, and whether I liked it or not, so was she. The rooftop felt different when I stepped back out. The warm glow of the string lights now seemed almost mocking. The music suddenly too sweet, too perfect, like it belonged to someone else's night entirely. Guests were scattered around with drinks in hand, talking and laughing, oblivious to the fact that I'd just seen the last thread of my marriage snap. A few people waved when they saw me, asking where Leora had gone, and I found myself muttering something about her mingling before slipping past them toward the bar. My voice sounded foreign to me, like it belonged to someone faking normalcy for a role he never auditioned for. The bartender didn't ask questions, just poured me something strong and set it in front of me with a quick nod. I took a sip and stared out over the city, the skyline glittering like it was taunting me with how beautiful the world could look while your own was crumbling. I kept telling myself to just make it through the night, smile for the sake of appearances, leave the fallout for later. But then I saw her reappear from the stairwell, the man in the navy blazer right beside her, and every bit of restraint I had left started to crack. They didn't walk back into the party like people who had been caught doing something questionable. No, they strolled in casually, like they'd just stepped out to check on the weather. She laughed at something he said, touching his arm in a way that felt far too familiar, and I realized she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. A couple of guests noticed too, giving quick, puzzled glances between me and them, but nobody dared to say anything. She spotted me at the bar and walked over with that perfect social smile she reserved for public moments, the kind that was convincing from a distance but brittle up close. "There you are," she said lightly, as if she hadn't just vanished with another man. "You've barely been around tonight. People are asking about you." I almost laughed at that, the absurdity of her flipping the script on me so effortlessly. I wanted to tell her that I knew exactly where she'd been, that the party didn't matter anymore, that the guests could toast her without me. But I didn't. I just looked at her, holding her gaze long enough for the smile to falter ever so slightly. Then I set my drink down, walked away from the bar, and headed for the far side of the rooftop where the floating lanterns were lined up for the finale. They were supposed to be lit at the end of the night, a grand, romantic gesture, everyone sending their wishes into the sky. I picked one up, felt the delicate paper crinkle under my fingers, and wondered what would happen if I let it go now, without lighting it. No wish, no glow, just an empty shell drifting away. It felt fitting somehow. Behind me, I could hear her voice mixing with his again, their laughter carrying in the warm night air. And as I stood there holding that lantern, I knew something had shifted in me for good. The part of me that still wanted to fight for her was gone. All that was left was the moment I'd finally stopped pretending. I stayed by the lanterns longer than I should have, watching the thin paper sway in the breeze, feeling the weight of my decision grow heavier with every passing second. The music behind me shifted again, something louder and brighter this time, and the crowd responded with cheers. I glanced over my shoulder just in time to see her in the center of it all, surrounded by friends, holding a glass of champagne high, like she'd just been crowned queen of the night. He was standing right beside her, leaning in close, his hand on the small of her back again, the same place my hand used to rest without thinking. It's strange how quickly humiliation can turn into clarity. In that moment, I realized there was no conversation we could have that would fix this. No amount of whispered apologies or awkward explanations would rewind what I had seen, or how easily she had let me fade into the background of her celebration. I'd been reduced to the guy who paid for the party while another man played the leading role. And the worst part? She seemed fine with that arrangement. I started walking toward her, weaving through clusters of guests, my mind running faster than my feet. People smiled at me, clapped me on the shoulder, thanked me for hosting such an amazing night. And each time I forced a nod, I could feel the heat building in my chest. When I finally reached her, she was mid-laugh, tilting her head toward him in a way that made it obvious she'd forgotten I even existed in that moment. I stepped in between them, close enough that the laughter died instantly. Her smile froze, his expression hardened, and the surrounding chatter dipped just enough for a few curious eyes to notice. "We need to talk," I said, not loudly, but with enough edge that she knew this wasn't something that could be brushed aside. She glanced at him, then back at me, and I could see it in her eyes. The calculation, the weighing of whether to follow me or stay rooted in her little circle of admiration. "I'll be right back," she said to him softly, before turning toward me. But I didn't lead her away from the crowd. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the cool metal of the ring pressing into my palm. It was heavier than I remembered, as if it had absorbed every unspoken moment of the night. Her voice was low, almost cautious. "Carlton, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I just opened my hand and let the ring drop onto the table beside us, the metallic clink cutting through the music. The sound turned more heads than I expected. For a brief, suspended moment, no one spoke. Then the murmurs began, spreading like ripples in water. I turned and walked away before she could say another word, leaving her standing there with the ring lying between us like a final, undeniable truth. I didn't know where I was going yet, just that I wasn't staying on that rooftop another second. The elevator ride down from the rooftop felt like it lasted hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. I kept my eyes fixed on the glowing numbers above the doors, refusing to replay what had just happened in my head. When the doors slid open to the lobby, the warm air of the summer night swept in, carrying with it the faint scent of the harbor. It was quieter down here, no music, no chatter, just the hum of the city, and for the first time all night, I felt like I could breathe. I stepped outside and kept walking until the building was behind me, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses fading into the distance. My phone buzzed in my pocket over and over, but I didn't look at it. Every vibration felt like a tether I didn't need anymore. I passed by a row of parked cars and paused, leaning against the cool metal of one just to let the night air fill my lungs. I realized then that I wasn't shaking with anger anymore. The ache in my chest was still there, yes, but there was something else too, something lighter. The truth was, I'd been carrying this weight for far longer than tonight. This wasn't just about a party or a man in a navy blazer. It was about years of trying to be enough for someone who was always looking elsewhere. And now, standing on that quiet street, I felt the strange relief of knowing the game was over. I didn't have to guess what she wanted anymore. I didn't have to compete for her attention. I was free to take all that effort, all that energy, and pour it into someone who would never treat me like a placeholder in my own life. Even if that someone, for now, was just me. I walked toward the waterfront, the city lights shimmering on the dark water like scattered coins. A street musician was playing a soft, mellow tune on a saxophone, and I stopped for a moment to listen. For the first time in months, maybe years, I actually smiled without forcing it. I didn't know exactly what came next. Maybe I'd travel. Maybe I'd pick up the guitar I'd abandoned years ago. Maybe I'd just let myself be a little lost for a while. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This night wasn't the end of me. It was the start of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. I turned my back on the building one last time and kept walking, each step carrying me farther away from the person I used to be and closer to the life I was finally ready to claim for myself.